Hi, I'm Chris Barber.
I'm Coleman Glenn.
I'm Grant Schnarr.
I'm Andy Dippa.
I'm Scott Frazier.
I'm Ray Silverman.
Question 2 is how, and I think I said this one too, how can we trust the Bible?
We sat down with different Swedenborgian ministers to address the most powerful philosophical and religious questions of all time, ranging from biblical contradictions to romance to the meaning of life. Welcome to Big Spiritual Questions. In this episode, we touch on inconsistencies in the Bible, like thematic differences in the Old and New Testaments, stories that contradict, factual impossibilities, miracles, and more. So, we wondered, with all of this, how can we trust the Bible?
How can we trust the Bible? That's a loaded question because in one sense, if you take the Bible absolutely literally, you really can't trust it. You can't.
I mean, you've got four Gospels that tell the same story but don't all fully agree. If you're looking at it for an exact record of everything that took place in the years that it covers, you're just not going to find what you're looking for because that's not what the Bible is there for.
First of all, everyone likes to take things out of context, and the Bible is in some ways the greatest example of this. You grab a passage here, you grab a passage there. For example, at one point, Jesus Christ announces to the crowd, if you don't eat my body, then go away, essentially is what he says. Well, this is absurd. And of course, everybody leaves, because something out of context is never going to make sense.
There's places in the Bible that are clearly immoral to take it literally. God, it actually does say, and this is an exact quote, but you can look it up, blessed are they who dash their enemies' children against the rocks. I would hope that we don't trust that and think that that is something that the Lord wants us to do.
I love the Bible. And I think there are consistent things throughout the Bible. I think if you look for the consistent things, you see there that even in the Old Testament, God consistently is referred to as merciful and loving and kind. And so the fact that there's things that seem to contradict are a problem to us only because the Bible itself has laid this foundational expectation that God is a God of justice, God is a God of mercy. And the Bible itself deals with those problems as you go through it, throughout the Bible. So for example, you get to the prophets in the Old Testament, and the prophets say things like, when you were called out of Egypt, God did not command you about sacrifices, he commanded you about justice. Now the truth is there's tons of commandments about sacrifices, but the Bible itself is saying those might not be the most important thing. So the Bible itself has some of the clues about how to deal with these apparent contradictions.
I think one of the things that's interesting, I don't know if everybody would buy this, is the idea that God's revelation has actually changed and been revealed to us step by step. I'll give you one example. Like in the Old Testament, they tell us, there's an angry God in the Old Testament. And a lot of that reason is because people at that time were very simple. In fact, the children of Israel, I know they're just sons of Israel, but they were called children. And in some ways we can see that. The only way that they would respond to God is if God was acting more like they were children, almost like an angry parent. I always give the example, if my child was about to stick his finger in a light socket, I wouldn't be like, come, let us reason together, please do not. I'd be like, get your hand out of the light socket, you're gonna get hurt or whatever. And I think that's what God comes across like in the Old Testament do not do that, you shall surely die, and this is how you should be. But it didn't stay like that. And that's what we have to see. When Jesus came along, he said again and again, you have heard that it was said of old, and he would say like an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I say love one another. When he says you have heard that it was said of old, he's actually saying you have heard that this was said in the Old Testament, in the Bible that he believed and the Jews believed. You have heard this said in the Bible, but I say unto you, and he would give us a completely different meaning or fill us in way more that God isn't that angry God, but a God of love.
And so if we see the Bible as a record of God dealing with particular people in particular places, it makes sense that it's going to be accommodated to where they are. So for people, the only way they can possibly imagine worshiping is through sacrifices. God's not going to say, don't sacrifice. God's going to say, here are some ways to sacrifice in a way that can represent something really good. And here are the more important things than sacrifice. If we look at the Bible as a process of leading people from where they are to somewhere better, then I think it helps deal with some of those apparent contradictions.
In a way, it's a mythology. And I don't mean that in the sense that there aren't things that are true. I do believe that all of the history of the Israelites and Jesus walking on earth, including his miracles, are absolutely true. But at the same time, there is deeper and deeper meaning in everything that Jesus says and does, in everything that the children of Israel go through. And if we look to that, if we open up our eyes to really look at that idea that we're to not just be so focused on the literal, but actually say, what is God really trying to say to us? Almost like reading a poem, God's poem, the Bible. Obviously, these things pull us to something, to look for something deeper inside.
I mean, do people know who Swedenborg is? Do you know who Swedenborg is? Are we assuming that your audience has any clue who he is? Okay, it's a shame because there's...
He was a scientist in the 18th century, later became a theologian, a revelator. He claimed that God gave him visions of heaven and hell, told him deeper meaning within the Bible.
So what we find then is that there's a symbolism within the Bible, and that symbolism is consistent. It follows all the way through the Bible. When one looks at the Bible through this perspective, through this angelic perspective, the inconsistencies in the Old and the New Testaments take on a whole lot of different meaning, and a lot of those inconsistencies are then resolved. But you can't just have the angelic without the physical story. It is like a body that contains a spirit.
So there are things in the Bible like Jesus saying, "He who lives by the sword shall die by the sword." So that sounds like, whoa, put the swords away, no aggression, no fighting, no war. And then in another place he says, "I have not come to bring peace but a sword." And that certainly sounds like a contradiction. So how can you trust that when he says two contradictory things? Swedenborg introduces what's called the Science of Correspondences, and he explains that a sword represents truth. And when you know that that is the truth, that a sword represents the truth, and he says something like, "I did not bring peace but a sword," it's meaning, it's not just, oh, everything's fine and everything's peaceful. No, the Lord has given us the truth so we can make fine discernments and make the right decisions. And then the other side of it, he who lives by the sword shall die by the sword. You know, when it's only just truth, it's truth against truth, sword against sword, clashing. There's going to be a lot of bad feelings and bitterness unless love is combined with the truth. He says truth without good is falsity, or truth without love. So these things always have to be combined. So all these things give me a feeling and a conviction that the Bible is the real deal.
But why bother with that work in the first place? I mean, if the Bible seems to contradict itself, why not just throw it out? And I think it's because there are those incredible insights, those incredible core ideas that for people who have really embraced them they've transformed the world, they've transformed people's lives.
And whether or not the number of sheep in someone's flock or the years that someone lived is spot on in the scriptures, that doesn't make a difference when it comes to me not being a jerk to you. I trust the Bible because it teaches me how to live and how to be good, not because it gives me a historical record of everything that's happened.
But you see, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Bible is organized to hold all the information in it so that we can unpack it forever. So it's like somebody looking at your packed suitcases and saying, well, but that's not a life. How do you use that stuff? Those are just cases. The idea is you unpack it and find everything that you need. Yeah, it takes a little bit of work, takes a little bit of study, but we've got eternity to do it because the stuff in there is eternal truth. It's not organized to be a good story. It's not organized to be easy. We all know that all the best stuff in life doesn't come easily. Value comes from discipline and perspective and study, hopefully and joy. So if you read it in context, the main ideas leap out at you. Love God, love the neighbor, learn the rules. Happiness comes from finding the truth. And then when you do that, we call those face and hands passages, then everything else starts to make more sense. So you take a concept like turn the other cheek. You know, if somebody slaps you, turn the other cheek to them. That sounds like terrible advice. But in its context, you see what the Lord is saying. If the world forces things on you, is there a lesson you can get from that? Can you take external problems, external resistance, and make it internal discipline? You see, armed with that information, now you see turn the other cheek as an invitation to take control of your life, to own your spirituality, and find happiness and satisfaction in living a life guided by interior truths, rather than just be tossed around by the vagaries of life.
The stories in the Bible contain unlimited spiritual knowledge, and disputes over their meanings have continued for thousands of years. Obviously, we can't address everything in a 10-minute video, but we'd love to hear your thoughts, so please comment below. If you'd like to learn more about our church, check out our website at newchurch.org. And if you're interested in talking with other people about spiritual topics like this, consider heading to grandhumanproject.org and finding a group that seems right for you. Thanks again for watching, and stay well.